Okay, hey everybody. So again, I hope you're staying safe and well, and that if anyone needs help getting vaccinations, please speak to myself. Mrs. Barbara Rudinsky is doing an incredible job coordinating this effort for so many people, okay, and so we're trying to help however we can. So please, if you know somebody needs help or you need help, please reach out. We want to make it as smooth and as easy for you as possible. And again, I hope you're staying safe and well. So let's jump right in. Our Parsha this week, let me actually set it up like that. Our Parsha this week is quite famous, Parshat Yitro. It's quite famous for a few reasons. The biggest reason of which is that it contains the Ten Commandments. And that's a big moment. And there's so much to talk about. But one of the really most mysterious subjects in the entire Torah actually walks itself into the very, very beginning of our Parsha. It's named after Yitro. And Yitro is the one who gets a lot of the attention because Yitro, who's Moshe's father-in-law, he shows up, and as we'll see in a minute, he says, wow, I'm so excited. I heard all the great things. I want to come here, and I want to be with you, and I want to offer advice. But one of the interesting things about the Torah is that we don't know actually a lot about Moshe's family. Well, what do we know about Moshe's family? Who can tell me? What's something that we might know about his family? How many children does Moshe have? Let's start there.
Two.
Good. He has two children. What are their names?
I know one of them.
Good question.
Good question. Gershom and Eliezer, right?
Right.
He has two sons. And so let's look at the very beginning of our Parsha just to see how it introduces us to this idea here. Let me share my screen with you. Can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Perfect. So our Parsha begins, Vayishma, I can make it a little bigger, I think. Yeah, there you go. Vayishma Yitro Kohen Mijan Choten Moshe. This is how our Parsha begins, chapter 18. So Yitro Hirsch, he's the Choten Moshe, he's Moshe's father-in-law. He's Kohen Mijan, he is a priest in Mijan. He hears Eit Kol Asher Asa Elokim LeMoshe L'Yisrael Amo. He hears everything that God did for Moshe and for his people. And in particular, Kiotzi Hashem Israel Mitzrayim, that in particular he heard about that God took the Jewish people out of Egypt. And what does he do then, Yitro? Vaikach Yitro Choten Moshe et Tzipora Eshet Moshe Achar Shilucha. Yitro takes Tzipora, who we know to be Moshe's wife, after she had been sent back home. So he takes her, and the Et Shtei Vaneha, and her two sons, Shem Achad Gershom. The first one is named Gershom, Ki Amar Ger Hayiti Beretz Nochriya, because he was named because Moshe was a stranger in a foreign land, so he was named in that way. And the second Shem Achad, the second child's name is Eliezer, Ki Elohei Avi Be'ezri Vayatzenu Mecher Paro, because he's the God of my father was my help, and God delivered me from the swords of Pharaoh. Now, this matches up perfectly. We're in chapter 18. But if you go back to chapter 2, so the Torah tells us the same story. Vateled Bain, he had a child. Vayikrat Shemo Gershom, he had a son. And this son was named Gershom. Ki Amar Ger Hayiti Beretz Nochriya, because I was a foreigner, a stranger in a foreign land. Now, when we talk about Moshe being a stranger in a foreign land, what land are we talking about him being a stranger in? Is it Egypt?
No.
It's not Egypt. It's Midian, right?
Midian. Yeah.
Excellent. So again, let's play it out. Moshe is raised in Pharaoh's house, and then he sees what happens. He has an incident by killing an Egyptian. Then he gets into an incident with these two Jewish people who are fighting. He goes on the run. He goes to Midian. He sees the daughters of Yitro needing help. He helps them. Yitro brings him into his house, and he ends up marrying Tzipora. And then the Torah tells us that he has a child, and he says, why is he named Gershom? Because I'm a stranger in a foreign land, and the foreign land being Midian. And so that's the first child. And the Torah then continues on and then tells us that he has a second child. Now, up until this point, we actually don't know he has a second child. The Torah makes no mention, unlike here in box 2, where the Torah tells us earlier that he had a child and this was his name. this is the first time that we're really introduced in earnest to Eliezer, his other child. And based on the naming and the reason for the name, the God of my fathers and my help, he delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. That seems to suggest that he was named after the revelation of Sinai, of the Sneh, not Sinai, a revelation of the burning bush, when God reveals himself to Moshe, and he says, I am the God of your forefathers, and I will protect you and take you out of Egypt. Now, exactly when that happens, we don't know when he has this child, but the fact that it references the God of my father was my help had to have come after the fact that Moshe met God. So we see that has one child before he meets God, and he names him Gershom, and he has a second child that he names Eliezer, that has to do with after he already has a relationship with God and is already on his mission. And so in a sense, these two names actually give us two very different, help us have an insight into Moshe's personality a little bit from two different angles. On the one hand, the name Gershom expresses Moshe's connection with Egypt and the sorrow that he had in terms of fleeing, right? And the name Eliezer, on the other hand, represents Moshe's religious personality and his connection to Hashem, which ultimately solidifies through the rest of his life experience. Question? I have a question. Okay. Now, this is the first that we hear about them all together as a family. And here's what's crazy. This is actually the last that we hear about them. In fact, we do not hear about Moshe or his family again. This is it. They are brought by Yitro. They show up with Yitro, and we never hear from them again. Why? What happens to them? Where are they? What do you think?
We know that Moshe and his was criticized for not having much time with or with his wife, and so maybe that's part of it. He's now so consumed with his leadership that he can't be a family man.
Excellent. So Robert is referencing something that happens later in Bamidbar in chapter 12, which is called the story of the Isha Kushite, the Cushite woman. And Rashi is, and that's the interpretation you're referencing, says that the Cushite woman was actually Tzipora. However, that is not a universal opinion. The Rashbam actually disagrees and says that the Isha Kushite, this Cushi woman, is not his wife. His wife is somewhere else. And that when Miriam, exactly like you said, when Miriam speaks ill about Moshe for not spending enough time with this woman, not referring to Tzipora, and we could talk about this again when we get to that Parsha, rather we're talking about a different woman that has entered the picture. But let's for a minute leave aside Tzipora or the Isha Kushite. What about his sons? What about Gershom and Eliezer? How do we not hear about them ever again? And by the way, let me show you how strange it is that we don't hear about them again. So for example, look here in Shemot chapter 6. This is again well before Parshat Yitro. So we're in the middle of telling all of the generations. Vaikach Amram et Yocheved. This goes back to Levi. So Amram takes Yocheved, his wife's sister, Lo Lisha for a wife, Vatel Lo et Aaron et Moshe, and he has two children, Aaron and Moshe. Ushnei Amram Sheva Shloshim U'Me'at Shana. He's 137 years old. He also has a daughter named Miriam, but let's leave that on the side. And so we see that Uvnei Yitzar Korach v'Nefeg v'Nochri. So we see that Yitzar has Korach, Uvnei Uziel, Mishael, Tzafan, and Sitri, right? So now we're going to introduce ourselves to Aaron's children. Vaikach Aaron et Elishava, bat Aminadav, Achot Nachshon Lo Lisha. So he takes this woman named Elishava for a wife. Lo et Nadav et Avihu et Elazar et Itamar. Aaron has 4 children, and we know them to be Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, and Itamar. Uvnei Korach. Now we see Korach's children, right? In verse 24. Verse 25 tells us Elazar ben Aaron lakach lo mimnot Putiah lo lisha. We hear about Elazar's children. Vatel lo et Pinchas takes us all the way to Pinchas, and then it tells us verse 26 Hu Aharon u'Moshe asher mar Hashem lahem hotziu et bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim al tzivotam. These are the people, Aaron and Moshe, who God told them to bring out the Jewish people from Egypt. So what is obviously missing here? We know this is chapter 6 already. We know that in chapter 2, that Gershom is already introduced to us. He exists already. So how come when we're listing the genealogies, how come when we're listing the genealogies, do we not include any information whatsoever about Moshe's children? Maybe Eliezer is not born yet. Fine, but Gershom is definitely born. The fact that it is left out is it's shocking. We're listing generations all the way to Pinchas. Why do we not list them at all? Well, let me show you another example about this. Ready? Ve'ele toldot Aaron and Moshe in box 4. These are the children of Aaron and Moshe. Pause. What would you anticipate comes next in the Torah?
Listing.
Correct. The listing of both of their children. The Torah tells us explicitly these are the children of Aaron and Moshe. And so what happens? Eila Shmot b'nei Aharon. These are the children of Aaron. Eila Shmot b'nei Aaron HaKohanim. Right? These are his children. Then we hear about Nadav and Avihu dying, and that's the end. No more. So if you want to say, well, previously we were really focusing on Aaron. It wasn't specifically about Moshe. Here the Torah tells us in Bamidbar, these are the generations. These are the children of Aaron and Moshe, and yet makes no reference to his children at all. Very famous idea brought by the Midrash, by Rashi, that says that why are Aaron's children listed as being Moshe's children as well, right? So the Midrash is bothered by the fact that Moshe's children are not listed here, but takes it from a different angle and wants to know, well, why do we list Aaron's children as also being considered progeny of Moshe? And this goes on to teach that a person who teaches another person Torah, another child Torah, it's as if they're like a father to them. And Moshe took these children under his wing, Aaron's children, and taught them Torah. But respectfully, Moshe, what happened to your wife and children? Why aren't you teaching Torah to your family? And so with all of that, Ibn Ezra has to make, in our Parsha, makes a wild, wild idea. Let's look back here to this pasuk. Laikach Yitro takes Tzipora, Eshet Moshe, the wife of Moshe, Achar Shilucheha, after she had been sent. What does that mean? Achar Shilucheha, after she had been sent. The word home is added. That's already an interpretation. The translation should be after she had been sent. What does it mean, Shilucheha? So look at the Ibn Ezra here in box 5. Achar Shilucheha, Yesh Omrim, some say, Achar Sheshalcha El Beit Avia Miderech Mitzrayim. One possibility is that what we're talking about is that he sent her back to her father's home because it was simply too dangerous to be in Egypt or something like that, right? That's one possibility. The second possibility is Yesh Omrim Shenatan La Get. Moshe divorced his wife. He divorced his wife. And the children went on to live with Tzipora and not with Moshe. Moshe didn't exactly have a stable life situation, so he was not granted custody of the children. So rather, Moshe was divorced from his family, not just metaphorically, but literally, according to the Ibn Ezra. Again, some say that was the case, and that's where they were. That's why we don't really talk about them, because while they were his biological children, they were off with Tzipora, and because they were divorced, she had custody over them. What do you think about that?
Upsetting.
I don't have a problem with that necessarily, but what about when Yitro hooks up with them later in the desert? Did he not? I mean, he would have brought his whole household with him. Was she and the kids not with him then?
Great question. Torah doesn't say that he brings them with him again. This is the end of it. We don't hear about them ever again. Right? It's very strange. It's a very, very strange piece of information. So we likely, by the way, what's happening in our Parsha might actually go back all the way to a previous incident. There's actually one incident of Tzipora, one real story with her, which has to do with Gershom. Let's take a look here in Shemot chapter 4, box number 6. Vahi baderach b'malon. One night they were traveling, they were on an encampment. Vayifkeshu Hashem vayivakesh hamito. God encountered him and sought to kill him. It's not clear who the him is here, but let's assume for a moment that it was either Moshe or alternatively the child Gershom. What does Tzipporah do in verse 25? Vatikach Tzipporah tsor. She takes a flint, like a rock, vatichrot et orlat bena, and she circumcises her son. Vatagal ragla vatomer ki chatan damim ata li. He touched his legs with it, saying, he touched Moshe's leg with it, maybe saying, you are truly a bridegroom of blood to me. Look at this. Vayiraf mimenu, and when he let him alone, when God let him, az amra chatan damim lamulot. A bridegroom of blood caused a bridegroom of blood because of this circumcision. And then the Torah continues after this like weird incident that's very hard to understand. The Torah says, "Vayomer Hashem Aaron lech likrat Moshe hamidbara." Go see Moshe. Vayelech vayifkeshu b'harolim vayishaklo. They went, they met each other, and they kissed each other. Right. So that's this weird enigmatic story. And so, for our purposes, what I think is important is that after God sought to hurt Moshe and Tzipporah, to hurt Moshe, Tzipporah in some way jumps to action, and twice, not once, but twice, calls him Chatan Damim, a bloody bridegroom. And so again, what that means is well beyond what we want to focus on today, but it doesn't sound good. It doesn't sound good at all, right? It sounds pretty bad. And so it seems to be that Tzipporah is telling Moshe that living with you involves some form of mortal danger, and maybe it would be best if I didn't live with you anymore, right? And so maybe achar shiluchaha, this is the moment that they separate. Because look, this is the end here. You have this little pay. This is the end of the idea. And they were going on their way. The next thing we see in verse 27 is that Moshe and Aaron meet up. But what about Tzipporah? What about the rest of her? Where is she? It sounds like after this moment, Tzipporah tells her husband, you are living and playing a very dangerous life. I can't be with you anymore. It's just too dangerous. So maybe this is the moment, according to the Ibn Ezra's opinion, of Yesh Omrim, that he divorces his wife right then and there. Or at the minimum, forget about the divorce. It sounds like at this point, she goes back to Midjan to be with Yitro, which then actually fits in nicely with, well, how come Yitro comes along and brings Moshe's family? When did they go back to be with Moshe? With Yitro, this is the moment. Because if they were with Moshe, then we would have expected them to have walked out of Egypt with Moshe and not been brought with Yitro. But yet they were. And this actually fits in nicely to the opening of our Parsha and the welcome that Moshe gives Yitro as well, relative to this. It's almost like perfect bookends. Look at the rest of, again, we only saw the first 4 verses. Look at how Moshe reacts when he sees Yitro. So, Vayavo Yitro choten Moshe uvanav yishto el Moshe el hamidbar asher uchuno sham Elohim. So they all come to see him in where he was camped out, where Moshe was camped out. And Vayomer el Moshe ani chotencha Yitro ba'ilecha. He says to Moshe, I am your father-in-law Yitro, right? And he introduces himself again. Vayetzei Moshe likrat chotno. Compare this verse here, verse 7, to verse 27 in box 6. Moshe goes out to meet his father-in-law. Vayishtachu, he bows to him. Vayishaklo, and he kisses him, right? And they say hello to each other. Look what happens here. When he goes to meet Aaron, he goes and meets him where? In the wilderness. Same thing, in the wilderness here. In the wilderness here, and he went and met him in the mountain of God, and he kisses him. They both kiss him. And so what I think is happening here in both instances, we have a close relative of Moshe who's going to the mountain of God, right, in the wilderness in order to meet him. And this warm encounter includes a kiss. And these two meetings, in many ways, it forms like a bookend or a circle, if you will, which begins in the first moment of confrontation over here where Tzipporah is sent away. And then the circle closes itself back here when Tzipporah makes her way back with Yitro. Right? I think the Torah here might be giving us these special words and details to help us draw a connection. And so what makes Tzipporah come back now? Well, the Torah tells us, going back to the very beginning, Vayishma Yitro. Yitro heard all the good things that happened. And when he heard all the good things that happened, so Tzipporah comes back with him. And so the question that we have to I guess take a minute to look at is, did Tzipporah, and in particular Moshe's children, were they impacted? Were they transformed spiritually? That's a better way of saying it, by the exodus from Egypt, right? Or did their time in Midian maybe mold them in a different direction, right? This might be the issue with the fact that Torah doesn't tell us anything about the children, right? It could be that Tzipporah and her children, they weren't there for all, they missed all the fun. I mean, not fun, but they missed all the excitement, right? The entire time that we're reading the story of the Exodus, Moshe's family is not there at all. During all the pivotal moments in history of the Jewish people, right, that we carry with us, we remember this moment, right? The plagues, the first time we have the Korban Pesach, the splitting of the sea. Moshe's family is not there. They don't get to experience it at all. And there's this the Gemara in Zvachim actually suggests, by the way, another possibility. I put this out of order by accident, but take a look at the Gemara Zvachim. There's an opinion that says that when Yitro comes, we see that he offers zvachim, he offers sacrifices, and we couldn't offer sacrifices before the giving of the Torah. So there's an opinion that suggests that when does Yitro come? He actually comes after the fact, after the giving of the Torah. So it's not just that Yitro, and in particular Tzipporah and Moshe's children, miss out on all of the hoopla and excitement and miracles of the Exodus from Egypt. Heck, they miss out on the revelation of Sinai too. They're not there for that at all. They are not there. So how could that be? Meaning, you mean to tell me that an all-powerful God could not have worked it out, that Moshe's children and his wife would have been protected, that they had to go back? What's the significance of this? Meaning, okay, I get it. It really does seem that they've missed out on so much. They're just not in it. They are literally outsiders, which we're going to explore more in a moment. But besides for being outsiders, they are. Why does God allow that to happen? Why doesn't God just give them some divine protection, the same way that God kept Moshe and Aaron safe and other Jewish people safe? Why couldn't he have done this? So there's an amazing idea by the Belzer Rebbe that I saw. It's so beautiful, that the pasuk tells us something about when we leave Egypt. One of the primary ideas of the Exodus from Egypt is ulaman tesaper bo'aznei bincha uven bincha et asher italalti b'mitzrayim that ototai asher samti bam vidatem ki ani Hashem. What is one of the reasons why God does this for us? So that we can retell the story to our children, to our children's children, about how God rose up and made a mockery of the Egyptians, and how he showed all these signs about God's strength, right? All of these amazing things that they should know that I am God. Now, who are you supposed to tell the story to?
Children.
Correct. Now, everybody who left Egypt experienced the miracle. So they don't need to be taught. They don't need to be told. They've all experienced it. It's a weird pasuk if you think about it. The Belzer Rebbe says that's right. Every child, until the next child was born after the Exodus from Egypt, this idea was not possible, except that there were two children and one family who did not experience the Exodus from Egypt. And who is that? Moshe's children. It's the Belzer Rebbe. I mean, it's a beautiful idea. What he suggests here is the mitzvah, the central mitzvah of Pesach, of V'igad to Levincha, was actually given to Moshe. He was the first. It was a special mitzvah given to him that Moshe should tell his children, and that we should follow in Moshe's steps in the same way that Moshe shared the story with his children so that they can share with their children afterwards. So too, we should do the same as well. He is the exception. And so it's a really kind of sad story in a way, if you think about it, to think about Moshe and his children and the fact that they weren't there with him during these major moments of life, these critical world-altering moments, whether it's the giving of the Torah, whether it's the Exodus from Egypt. It's a little bit sad not to have that. And I think on one perspective, we can suggest that Moshe perhaps pays a very heavy price for cutting himself off from his family, right? By sending his family away and not taking them with him, he pays a price. The price is that his children, they don't feel as connected. They're outsiders. Yes, he's given this mitzvah, and it's a beautiful thing that God understood the price that Moshe paid as a leader. And often as leaders, we pay prices, and it's our family. When we sacrifice, when we're leaders, and we sacrifice for our community, oftentimes it's our children who suffer the most. And we see this literally right here in the Torah. Moshe's children really do suffer the most. And again, they weren't, Gershon and Eliezer are just not full partners in the covenant the way that everybody else is. And in fact, we actually see this idea and the, I want to call it like the ramifications, if you will, of this decision by Moshe in a really strange way. Look at this pasuk here. So the pasuk says as follows. This is in Shoftim, okay, in Book of Judges. V'akimu lehem b'nei Dan et hapesel. The Danites, the tribe of Dan, they put up a sculpted image, a idolatrous image. The Yonatan ben Gershon, and Jonathan the son of Gershon, ben Menashe, the son of Menashe, hu banav hayu kohanim l'shevet hadani ad yom galut haaretz. This person, Yonatan, the son of Gershon, the son of Menashe, served as the priest to this tribe until they went into exile. In other words, they were idolatrous in this way. Now, I'm going to zoom in really deep here. I'm going to see if this works. Do you notice anything weird about the spelling of the word Menashe here?
Sure, it's got a tiny noon.
Yeah, now, I made that nun tiny myself, lest you think this is, I made it tiny in the editing. But if you look in the Torah, actually, the nun is all the way up here. It's not down, it's a superscript, it's on the top. And if you were to take out the letter nun, what would that say?
Moshe.
It would say Moshe, exactly right. So the Gemara in Baba Basra suggests, who is this guy? Who is Gershon, the son of Menashe? It's not Gershon, the son of Menashe at all. It's Gershon, the son of Moshe. There was no Gershon, son of Menashe. That person doesn't exist. We have the genealogies. But there is a Gershon who's the son of Moshe. And look what Rashi tells us. Rashi says, why Ben Menashe? In deference to Moshe, the letter Nun was included, thus altering the name. It is scripturally suspended to indicate that he was actually not Menashe, but Moshe. The Torah is telling us, and it's unbelievable, the Torah is telling us that what happens to Moshe's grandchildren? They become idolatrous. Think about this, the greatest prophet of all time. His children end up as far off the derech as possible. They are literally doing idol worship. And so on the one hand, it would seem like Chazal are teaching us that we need to be careful about Moshe's honor, and that's why they're not telling us this, but yet they're revealing the secret at the same time. And let's think back how we started to Moshe's names for a second, to how he names his children. Which of his two children are the ones that has a grandchild who is idolatrous? It's not Eliezer, it's Gershon. Gershon was named Ki Ger Hayiti Be'eretz Nochriya, because I was a stranger in a foreign land. Eliezer, we said the root of his name was a name of faith, right? I'm thanking God for protecting me. It was about, he had a deep connection. It was after he saw the bush. But Gershon, he's Jewish, but everything about him is foreign. It's strange. Everything about him is unwelcome, right? The whole world he sees as an Eretz Nochriya. It's just, he's always the outsider, right? And so in some ways that works, right? For a lot of people, you can be an outsider and that gives you strength. But when he passes that message to his children, which is like, treat the world with suspicion, be careful about what happens because you don't belong to the world. You're really an outsider. You're not an insider. You're an outsider, right? So then the next generation doesn't drink the Kool-Aid the same way that Gershom does. They're one generation removed from Moshe. Moshe taught Gershom, he got something. And even though he felt like an outsider, Moshe made him feel like an insider. But Gershom never felt as much of an insider, and therefore he was not as careful with his own children. And when he wasn't careful with his own children, ultimately they stray off the path. And so I think we can learn a few things from the story here. The first is the importance of making sure that people who are different, people who maybe have different backgrounds, who are coming from different places, that we make them feel included, even if they weren't part of it from the beginning. Gershon missed all the hoopla of the Exodus from Egypt. According to one opinion, he missed the giving of the covenant of Sinai, getting the Torah. He was the ultimate outsider, and yet he was Moshe's son. We need to think about how do we make those who feel on the outside feel like they're on the inside. That's the first thing. And the second takeaway, I think, is the tremendous cost, the tremendous sacrifice that leaders make. Moshe made a very tough decision. We never hear about his children again because they likely went back to Midian. He literally sends them away in order to shepherd the Jewish people. And sometimes when we have leaders who are working so hard for us, or when we are working so hard for our communities, so it requires sacrifice. And those sacrifices take a toll, and they are not easy, and they come at a cost. And the more that we appreciate the cost, the greater we can look at those leaders and realize how great they are and what they've given to us. We knew that Moshe was the greatest prophet of all time, but we never knew what it took for him to be the greatest prophet. When we see it from that perspective, we have a much greater appreciation for his greatness and for what leadership is really all about. And so we'll stop right here. We hope everyone stays well.